So before we close out, I was asking Hazel about the history of the LGBTQ community and why have they added the new colors to the flag. As you can see, brown and black, right?
Black and brown. Yeah.
Black and brown. Okay. And she's gonna tell us about it.
Yeah. So in Philadelphia, right, we wanted to acknowledge, right, how we so specific within Philadelphia context, right, there was a lot of racism that showed up, and that shows up, right, within the LGBTQ community, and folks will say to me, well, gay people can be racist. Yeah, because those are different parts of ourselves, right? And a lot of the gay rights, right, or a lot of LGBTQ rights that we have today are largely benefiting only LGBTQ people, right, who come from other privileged intersections, right? So they're largely cisgender identified, right? So identify within the sex given to them, right? They're largely men, gay men, right, that are white, usually are the ones that own all of the gay bars in the city of Philadelphia. And so a lot of the rights, right, or protections that we have are oftentimes more so benefiting the trans or the LGBTQ folks within those more privileged intersections. And so the black and brown stripes are to both talk about, right, and bring and center black and brown LGBTQ folks, because there's also a lot of pushback in the community from like white LGBTQ folks, and they say, well, we need a white stripe. And it's like, well, the white stripe is inherent. Right? Actually. Oh. Right? Like not to be shady or anything, but we know that the society and system is inherently built off of oppression, and built off of oppression of black and brown people, right? Built off of the oppression of people of color. And so white supremacy is rooted in every single institution, every single club, every single everything, every single system that we show up in, right? And so by centering and acknowledging the black and brown folks, right, within the community, as well as them being the folks that started, right, a lot of the shift in the movement pertaining to LGBTQ rights historically, which are Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, which is a black and brown trans women, which are black and brown trans women of color. Right? So in 2015, the Stonewall movie came out. So the Stonewall riots happened in 1969 in New York. And so there was this bar that was raided by the police a lot, that a lot of LGBTQ youth, a lot of LGBTQ folks showed up and would be able to freely be themselves. And so the police came over, they raided the bar, and over a few minutes, right, those numbers started growing up to 600, right, LGBTQ folks fighting back against law enforcement. And in the 2015 Stonewall movie, the person who was seen to throw the first brick at the Stonewall Inn was a white cisgender man, right? When actually the person who threw that brick was Marsha P. Johnson, who is a black trans woman, right? And so we don't often name, right, where these pride marches first historically happened, how they happened, who created, who started, right? A lot of the shift in the movement around more radical politics too, because we also have to name respectability politics, right? Because the way that black and brown folks are going to show up, right, we're oftentimes more policed for being black and brown people, but then when we add our race on top, if we add our race, if we add our gender on top of that, right, as women, right, and if we add what type, right, in our experience pertains to our gender, like trans, right, you begin to see how unique that individual's experience is going to be within systems of oppression, right? And so as a white cisgender man, seen as the person starting starting the gay riot, right? Starting the one of the biggest movements within the LGBTQ community, when it was actually created by black trans women. And so by adding that stripe, not only acknowledges the black and brown LGBTQ people who've been fighting within the Philadelphia community against racism, the Philadelphia queer community, against racism, but also names and uplifts and centers the Black and brown trans women that have been fighting, who have been in the back and behind the scenes for forever, right? And so I personally like the stripes, but also we have to name too that I don't want to sit here and have a million conversations about Black and brown stripes, right? Because trans women of color are still being murdered out here at disproportionate rates, and media is still perpetuating stereotypes around trans women. The government is not here to support trans people, but if we add on top of that trans people of color because of the way that racism intersects with transphobia, and then we also have to name and talk about housing instability and homelessness to LGBTQ youth within this country and within and even within our own city. So yeah, there's a lot more issues out here that need to be talked about. There's a lot more voices other than mine that need to be talked about, because yes, I recognize that I'm also a trans woman of color, but I also come from privilege from all of those intersections, right? Like, I'm light-skinned, I'm a person who had access to a medical transition, right? And I think to myself a lot of times, if I didn't have that, would I even have this job? Because 70% of trans Pennsylvanians live below the poverty line. And so there are actual issues that are showing up within the LGBTQ community that a lot of white LGBTQ folks are like, we got gay marriage, right? But are not talking about all of those other intersections pertaining to being an LGBTQ person, right? And pertaining to the entire community. And then I didn't really want to name her, but I feel like this is an important time to talk about her, right? Caitlyn Jenner. After the current Trump administration brought out that release around shifting the language or around changing the definition of gender to erase trans people's entire decades and centuries and centuries and decades, right, of resistance and of personhood and humanity. Caitlyn said, I was wrong this entire time, right around Trump, and people will tell me, well, yeah, I didn't really like her before, but what she did was so amazing. We need to stop giving her so much praise, right? Because the only reason why she stood up against the current administration around her being wrong this entire time without even recognizing everything that he said and done beforehand, is because now your privilege as a white trans person is now compromised. Right? And so that's the only reason why you're showing up. You didn't show up when Trump tried to ban 7 Black and brown immigrant, Muslim countries, right? You didn't stand up and say, well, what about my brothers and siblings, right? You didn't stand up and say that, right? You only stood up because your privilege was now being compromised. And so that's why it's important to have these conversations around intersectionality as well and have collective liberation, right? Because my privilege is not going to come at the expense of folks with disabilities. It's not going to come at the expense of Muslim folks. It's not going to come at the expense of darker skinned people, right? We all need to band together and come together, because collective liberation, is one of the things that I also use. And I also use all of the frameworks and teachings of the Black and brown women in history, right, that have done a lot of this work. Like Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, Harriet Tubman, right? All of these folks are frameworks, right, that help move me, bell hooks, right, that help move me in the work that I do.
So as you guys can see, like, I'm still excited. I've learned a lot from being here. And like Hazel said, like, educate yourself. Don't assume that you know. I assumed that I know, and I found out I had a lot of biased opinions. So I'm glad that I came to educate myself. That was one of the things that me and the production team were going back and forth about. I'm like, listen, this is important. Like, we have to find someone who can really inform the youth and inform us, because it's our reality. It's something that we are seeing every day, and it's not talked about. So I definitely wanted to bring attention to my channel, educating parents, maybe young folks who are afraid to come out. Like, you're not alone. Like, we're all here for you. And I learned that I'm an ally, right? Ally, right?
Yeah.
No, that's not the right term?
Yeah. Don't put me on the spot like this.
That's he's a supporter, right? Or no? Okay,
Yes.
I'm not there yet.
Well, because I was confused because you said that you were questioning earlier. So I was like, if you're questioning, then you're not really an ally.
Then say that.
So
like, we gotta be honest.
So if you're questioning your identity, right, then you may be in the community, right? Also, yeah, so if you're not in the community, but you actively support LGBTQ folks, right? And, again, with any other oppressed group of folks, right, you're an ally, but also recognize that ally is not a term that you can self-identify with, right? Because we can't we're not going to have white people come up to us saying that I'm a supporter of black folks and you say racial microaggressions every day. So you're not, so you know what I mean?
Got it. I'm not an ally yet.
So, and there's definitely more frameworks too, like, because then there's ally and then there's accomplice, right? If you think about accomplice, right, partners in crime, it's people that are actively willing, right, to fight the fight hand by hand, side by side, right? Okay. Who are willing to even use their privilege to uplift and center, right, and allow people within those oppressed groups to talk about their experience, to talk about their expertise, because experience is expertise. I just want to get that clear, right? Because there's nothing that a doctorate person, right, could read in a textbook within their 12 years of schooling, right, that can live up to the amount of experience that individuals have, right? And also, too, because we know that everything is ran by white supremacy, right, they're going to also censor the voices of the most oppressed, oftentimes. And so we also have to keep those types of things in mind. Also, when you're Googling, trying to do your own education, right, trying to do all of that, make sure it's coming from credible resources, right, because Google is also ran, right, and also through white supremacy, right, and so, yeah, it's like, we gotta do the work. We gotta make sure it's credible sources. We gotta make sure that the people in the community are the ones writing their own narratives and not white, cisgender, straight identified people creating, and writing the narrative for us, right? We have to be the ones to write our own and talk about our own narrative.
I love that. Because that's basically what I'm trying to do with the channel, share my experiences to help better educate the youth. So thank you so much for letting me come to your office and, educating my viewers, about the LGBTQ community. And thank you.
Yeah, really absolutely. I appreciate you reaching out.
And we'll catch you next time. Bye.